please call the roll?
Mrs. Greiner.
Present.
Mr. Peters.
Present.
Mr. Kozier.
Present.
Dr. Rosello.
Present.
Ms. Myers.
Here.
Ms. Hardiman.
Present.
Mr. Tripp.
Here, and if you would all join me in a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. The pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next up, we have approval of the minutes for the work session and workshop business meeting of June 25th. Is there a motion?
I move that the minutes from the work session and workshop business meeting of June 25th be approved as presented.
Thank you.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion regarding the minutes? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Motion carries. That brings us to public participation. We do have one individual that has called in requesting time to address the board. Mr. Roger Carlin, would you please approach the podium? You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
As Mr. Tripp mentioned, my name is Roger Carlin. I'm the Evangelism and Outreach Chair for Our Savior's Lutheran Church here in Council Bluffs. For those of you that may not know, we're just a block down the hill from the Dodge House, so right down in the downtown part of Council Bluffs. And I'm joined here tonight by Alan Hesse, who is another member of our team. And at a meeting here earlier this year, we were talking about the valuable service that the school board provides and thinking about a tangible way that we might thank you for your service. And so what we decided on was to present each of you with an engraved Bible, and we hope that that might be a valuable resource for you throughout this coming year. And I'd like to share with you, I've got Lauren's here with me. It says, this Bible is presented with gratitude for your dedication to our schools. Our Savior's Lutheran Church presents you with this Bible as a symbol of wisdom, guidance, and inspiration. May this Bible serve as a source of strength as you lead and shape the future of our educational community. So, like I said, we just wanted to be this a tangible way of our thanks, and hopefully you'll be reminded of that throughout the school year this year. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Roger. Appreciate it. Is there any other member of the public who wishes to speak tonight? All right, moving on. That brings us to our superintendent's report. Dr. Murillo.
Thank you, Mr. Tripp. At this time, I'd like to invite Ms. Comine to the podium. We are going to recognize a few of our outstanding athletes that was recognized for their state-level honors. So, Ms. Comine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Murillo. We have 3 STAR students we're recognizing tonight, 2 of whom that are here. At this time, I'd like to invite Superintendent Dr. Murillo and Board President Jared Tripp toward the podium to assist with our STAR students. Okay. Tonight, we are recognizing 3 female soccer players from Thomas Jefferson High School. All 3 of these students received numerous recognitions from the Iowa Girls Coaches Association. The first student is McKenna Kramer. So McKenna, please come to the front. McKenna is a first-team All-State midfielder. This is the 3rd time she's been chosen as an All-State player. She also earned All-Conference, All-District, and All-City honors. Congratulations. Next is Cameron Hosick. Cameron is a second-team All-State goalie. This is the 3rd time she's been chosen as an All-State player. She broke the TJ career shutout record with 1 season yet to play. The record is now at 24 career shutouts, and she tied the season shutout record at 11. She also earned all conference, all district, and all city honors.
So I need to say a couple of things. Watching you guys play was wonderful this year. And especially I remember the ALTJ game that felt like it was going on forever. And so I was super excited, hoping that we would have a shootout at the end, or I think it's called something else, right? But no one told me I had to go to extra innings to get to that shootout, right? But I can tell you, your two leadership on the field is amazing to watch you guys. I moved around from side to side, and then I felt like I couldn't see well, so then I ended up by where you were at the goalie. And it was just, you guys just taking Thomas Jefferson to next level in the girls, the female and male sports. I appreciate your dedication to our school and our district, and you guys had a fabulous year.
We also have Mr. Luke Peterson, who is the athletic director at Thomas Jefferson here. I'll let you start to take pictures as I also recognize Taryn Gant was a senior who graduated in May this past year, and she was a second-team All-State defender. She also earned all conference, all district, and all city honors, and she will be attending Iowa State University in the fall. So congratulations to Taryn as well. Thank you so much, and this concludes our STAR students tonight.
Would you like me to move on to the informational? Yeah, okay. Yeah. And thank you again, Ms. Colmine, for showcasing our athletes, and Mr. Hamilton for your work over the athletic department. I can truly see a growth in both areas, and I'm super excited we still have our baseball, softball teams we'll honor in August, and just a lot of great things happening for our students. And to see their leadership, I think, is the best piece for me, because it's the leadership and the adult that we see coming forth out of our high school kids that just makes it worth all of the extra time that we put in. At this time, we're going to move into our informational presentation, and I'd like to invite Lori Leham, our CFO, to the podium, who will introduce our guests tonight. Our first informational presentation will be our 22-23 audit. And I really appreciate the work that Lori put in on this, coming in behind Dean and then behind a second person and taking this on. I appreciate all the hours that you put forth, and I appreciate the work and the partnership that we have with the new auditors that we work with this year. So, Ms. Leham, I'll let you set the stage.
Thank you, Dr. Morello, and good evening, Board of Directors. And I would like to introduce Jamie Fay, who is a partner with the Eide Bailly CPA firm. So they're out of Minnesota that we're dealing with, and would like her to present for us now.
Good evening. Thank you. As Lori said, I'm Jamie Fay. I'm an audit partner with Eide Bailly. So really high level, I know you've seen Justin here in the past. They merged in, their Syme Johnson firm merged into Eide Bailly within the last year. And with that was some really exciting opportunities. I work exclusively in the government world, so it made sense for me to kind of take over and dig into the details, because I love government accounting, unlike everybody who leaves right before we talk about the audit. So I will keep this very high level. I try my best to make this presentation something that is understandable and valuable to you. If you have any questions, feel free to stop me throughout or at the end. But hopefully you get some value out of this. So first and foremost, again, I want to also thank Lori and her team. The audit, we kind of come in and shake things up and ask a bunch of hard questions, and that's even harder if you weren't here during the year. So we were asking Lori about things that happened before she was here, which made it extra challenging. We are talking about the year ended June 30, 2023. So keep that in mind when we're looking at this. So thinking there's COVID funding going on, kind of what was going on in that year. So first and foremost, people say, Well, what are our results? Tell me what I need to know. So first and foremost, when you hire an audit firm to do an audit, we come in and we provide an opinion on if your financial statements are materially accurate or not. So what that means is we do not look at every transaction. We do not tie things out to the penny. We have a materiality threshold. We test a sample of transactions. So maybe we look at 40 expenditures from this bucket and we recalculate 5 people's payrolls, and then we take this number and we say, hey, we think it should be this, but it's actually this. What happened? And I like to explain that because if we were looking at every single transaction, we would just be a member of your team at that point. So that's really what an audit is. For Council Bluffs, we do a financial statement audit, which is kind of the general operations of the district. And then also you get a separate, what they call single audit over your federal dollars. So if you spend more than $750,000 of federal money in a year, you get this other kind of, it's called a single audit, and that's really more compliance-based. So over your federal dollars, did you spend them the way you were supposed to? Did you file the right reports? That kind of thing. So first and foremost, you got a clean, unmodified opinion on your financial statements. That's what you want. That's what you've received. You also got that same clean, unmodified opinion over the single audit, the federal audit as well. So in talking about the federal programs tested, what we do when we do the federal audit is we look at all of the programs that you received money under, and then there's a number of criteria that the federal government has set out. And so this year we tested Title I and then some COVID money, some Education Stabilization Fund. So you had about $25 million in federal money that was spent during the year. So we tested these 2 programs. Out of those 2 programs, we looked at things like, did they spend it in the ways they were supposed to? Did they file the right reports? Did they file reports timely? So that's the items that come out of these federal finding, or the federal results. So after people say, okay, what was the audit opinion? The next question I always get is, what did you find? What can you tell me? What do we need to do better? And for audit findings, those are also broken out. So the first bucket is financial statements, and you can see there's 3 findings listed there. The first one is preparation of financial statements, including CFA, which is Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards. The second one is material adjustments, and then the third one is segregation of duties. These 3 are very common in governmental accounting, especially with finance departments. If you do not have a number of CPAs on staff that can really dig into the standards, you're going to probably have at least a couple of these, especially with the turnover that happened in the finance department. Not shocking, not surprising. I say all of that to say, yes, you have findings, but these aren't findings that really concern me. I see this a lot. They're not anything that really ever come back and cause issues. We obviously can work with the district if hey, we want to get rid of that material adjustment. Lori's got her feet under her now, let's talk about how to do that. Or hey, the segregation of duties finding, maybe somebody wasn't reviewing quite right. We didn't have the right segregation of that. How can we make that better? We're happy to work with the district on getting that cleaned up. And so I wouldn't necessarily expect to see all of these next year. But again, if we do, they're not a big deal. The second bucket is federal award findings. So on those federal dollars, we didn't find anything to report. That doesn't mean we didn't have questions throughout the way. That means we had questions, we got them answered, we worked through it. There was nothing that rose to the level of needing to report it. And then the third bucket is kind of that catch-all, the statutory requirements that the state kind of says, hey, you should look at these things. We didn't have any findings to report there either. So all of that is great news. So now we're going to look at some dollars, some graphs, historical information. I think there's only 1 page in here that's all numbers, so hopefully that can catch everyone's attention. So first and foremost, cash and investments. So this is a look at overall cash and investments for the district for the past 5 years. We take out any capital project funds in there because those are for a certain specific project. There is not a right or wrong answer to what this number should be. This is really just to show you, hey, this is where you've been. This number can fluctuate if you've got a lot of accounts payable outstanding, if you've got a lot of accounts receivable outstanding, if you have a lot of COVID dollars sitting that you're ready to spend. So you can see it did dip a little bit in 2023, but again, not anything that's concerning. The next slide is the numbers slide. It's going to be little, so bear with me. Really what this slide is doing is it is showing you what you budgeted compared to what really happened. So a couple really high-level things I want to point out. So you had about $172 million of revenue that you received for the district. This is overall. You budgeted about $136 million. So you got more than you had budgeted. That is conservative budgeting. I see that with almost all of my governments where they're being conservative with their budgeting because those revenues, you just never really know. Some of that funding can be one time, sometimes it fluctuates. The next bucket, the total expenditures, is about $176.5 million. You had budgeted about $107.1 million, so there was a little bit more spent than had been budgeted. With this procedure, what we do is we ask questions to say, hey, what happened? Why was there more spent than budgeted if it's over a certain amount? And through our procedures, there was nothing that came to light that we needed to report to you. So rest assured that we did some work on this. It is not uncommon to spend more or less than what you budget. That's the nature of the organization. And then at the end of the day, the ending net position or fund balance for the district was about $44.2 million. So a little bit of a reduction, about $4 million of a reduction. There was some spend down that happened. There was some COVID money that was spent in the past year. So that's where the district ended up, and that's overall. So next, we are going to look at just the general fund. When you look at the whole district, it's great, but kind of narrowing down on some of those specifics can be a little bit more helpful. So first is the general fund. This is the activity for the past 5 years, looking at revenues and expenditures. So what did you receive and what did you spend out? So you can see these are actually very close every single year. So you received about $137,000 in revenues and $133,000 in expenditures. So really pretty close. After a net transfer out, the reduction in this fund was about $4 million. Again, when we talked through it, it sounded like it was well known. It's not a concern. It's just to show you, hey, this is where you're at, to make sure that you've got a pulse on it. What you don't want is for that number to keep dropping and you just don't know where it's coming from. So just being aware is a great first step. That also ties into enrollment. So districts nationwide are very impacted by their enrollment. If you have less students, you get less revenue. That impacts a lot of things. So this is your enrollment for the last 5 years. Lori and I sat down right before this meeting. We were kind of talking, and everybody knows what happened between 20 and 21. And I will tell you, this is what I'm seeing across most of my districts nationwide, is there was a dip after 2020, and they're not really seeing an increase coming back. So I know there are some projections that the district is doing, so just being aware of where we are compared to where we're going, that is valuable information as you look forward to the future. So the bottom line in the general fund is called fund balance, and we like to talk about that. It's a big number, so I want to try to break it down into a way that is valuable for you. So the reason you want a positive fund balance is, number one, it contributes to a favorable bond rating, so better interest rates if you go out for debt. It produces some investment income, some working capital, a little bit interest earned on there, meeting cash flow needs. And then third, and I would argue probably most importantly, it offers a little bit of a cushion. So if something like a global pandemic happens, you are able to respond to that and continue operating. So those are the reasons you want the fund balance. Now, when you look at the actual numbers, it is broken out into a few different categories. Not every district uses every category, but I like to put them up here so that you know what they are. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but non-spendable is a certain number that it has to agree to things like prepaids on your financial statements. You don't have a lot of control over that number. Restricted is a portion of your fund balance for money that you have received from an outside party that is legally restricted to be spent on something. A good example of this is something like COVID funds. They said, hey, you have to spend this on certain things. If you had not spent it at the end of the year, it sits in a restricted fund balance. Committed and assigned are kind of more optional, where school boards and school districts can opt to say, hey, we've got a project coming up, let's set some money aside. We're going to use a committed or an assigned number. Council Bluffs did not use that in the past year. Actually, in the past 5, it doesn't look like. So that's probably not super applicable to you, but I like to list it in case you're kind of comparing to other districts and you see that. And then the unassigned is that leftover. What else is out there that's not in any of those other categories? So then we'll look at the total fund balances. This is for the general fund. So you can see there is a decrease from 22 to 23. That's that $4 million that we were talking about. And what I wanted to point out, what Lori and I kind of chatted about, you can see the red portion. So the red portion is restricted. That is money you have received that is required to be used for something you haven't spent. So that actually grew in terms of dollars and a percentage of the total, even though the total fund balance decreased. So that's just being aware of, hey, we've got this money here, we have to spend it on certain things, and we want to make sure we're seeing that. I am seeing that in a lot of my districts because there are things like categorical aids that you've gotten that you're actually getting federal money that you're spending on something where you would normally use this money to spend it on there. So they're seeing a little bit of a difference in that restriction. And so just being aware of it being there, making sure you're spending it in the ways that it needs to be spent. And that's, when I was talking to Lori, we had a great conversation about it. So it's something that the district is well aware of. But I just like to talk about that too. And then the last graph on the general fund is the unassigned fund balance. So when we talk about fund balance, it's a big number, and I get the question, well, what does that even mean? What are we supposed to have? You know, you say hundreds of thousands or millions or whatever that number is. I don't understand what I'm supposed to do with that information. So this is a good way to break it out, is fund balance, unassigned fund balance as a percentage of general fund expenditures. So what that means is that's that leftover bucket as a percentage of what you spent in the year. So that is 8% for this year. You can see it's a little bit of a drop from last year, which we saw with the $4 million drop. The state of Iowa and the National Government Finance Officers Association both recommend this being between 5 and 15%. That does not mean you have to be there. There are certain districts that want that number to be a lot higher. There are certain districts that want it to be within a range. Council Bluffs specifically doesn't have its own policy. So I would say that 5 to 15% is a good benchmark for you to kind of gut check it with, and you're right in the middle of that. You can set a policy. There's what's called a GASB 54 fund balance policy that's out there. The district has a policy to say, hey, this is how we use these fund balances. As part of that, you could set a minimum, a maximum, a floor, if the district wanted to. It is not something you've done in the past, but it is an option that's out there.
And we need it, because as in 2010, when there was a cross-board cut mid-year, a lot of school districts, having 5 to 10% in unspent fund balance to negative fund balance because the state came in and just said, we're not going to pay you more money. They had an across-the-board cut that affected every school. So having that range was important to be able to keep districts with money
Yeah.
that's unspent.
Absolutely. And it's a good way for you to be aware of, hey, we are looking at whatever it may be, budget cuts or raises or whatever. If you are at 8% and your floor is 5, that is a very different conversation than if you're at 20% and your floor is 5. So it's just something to be aware of. A good way to kind of think about this because I get a lot of questions of like, I don't understand what 8% means. If you think about your personal finances, a lot of personal financial planners will tell you to have 6 months in the bank. That is 50%. So you're at 8%. So if you think about that in terms of 50% is 6 months, 8% is a little under 1. So again, it's not where you have to be. I'm not suggesting districts have 50%. That's just how I can kind of think through it in my brain. That seems to work pretty well. All right, now we'll look at a couple of the other funds of the district. So outside of the general fund, the district has a capital projects fund. So this fund operates for the purpose of big projects. So you get some funds in, whether that be bonded or however else that money comes in, donations. You spend it on a project, then this fund rolls over usually into a debt service when you have that debt to pay for. So you can see there was a drop from 20 to 21, and then it's kind of ebbs and flows a little bit. This is really going to fluctuate just depending on what kind of construction is happening in the district for the year. So that really couples into the next slide, which is the debt service fund. So debt service funds are strictly for the purpose of taking in the money that you are using to pay your debt. So your principal and your interest on bonds, notes payable, all of that stuff. This should have some kind of fund balance buffer in there because that way you are taking in and you're able to pay your debts, because if you're not able to pay your debts, then that causes different issues. So you do tend to see in all governments that this grows a little bit over time, and you can kind of see that in the last 5 years. It's just kind of slightly growing each year. That means that you're able to pay your debts and you're able to put a little bit away for that. Once debts are paid off, there is requirements for how those monies are allocated to either other debts or other projects, and that's all in the debt agreements that are in there. And then the other two funds, the first one is the School Nutrition Fund. So this one, you can see for the past 5 years, it was a slight increase and then a jump and a jump. And COVID had a lot to do with this one. There was a lot of COVID money out there for school nutrition. There's a lot of requirements around how this money can be spent when you do have it in there. There's a lot of requirements around what rates do you charge, who can you give meals to. It sounds like you have a great director that is really good at finding some pockets of money to pay for some of those projects. So that's why you're seeing the increase here. And then the last fund is the regular education preschool. So this fund was new in '22 because that was a new year for this program. So you can see a little bit of a dip, 1,385, which in reality, that's pretty break even in the accounting world. And then a negative 5,918 for 2023, which again is pretty break even. I will tell you across districts nationwide that I look at, these types of funds tend to need some kind of subsidization through the general fund, through grants, something, because there's such a shortage of childcare and ECFE, and it's so expensive, but it doesn't necessarily cover the costs. So a lot of times I do see this being subsidized. It sounds like this program's kind of just getting its feet under it, so just being aware of how it's operating is helpful. I would say this is not something where you need to immediately make big cuts right now because it was not in the positive, but just being aware of how it's operating is helpful. And with that, that is all I have for numbers for the night. Does anybody have any questions for me? All right, hearing none, you all have my contact information at the end of this presentation. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, again, I echo appreciation for the district and Lori and her team for getting this done, and we look forward to working with her in the future. Have a great night.
Amy,
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, so now we'll move on to our second informational presentation. And this evening, Dr. Matthews is going to bring us an update on the AI work group. I really appreciate her leadership around this topic, getting it going, and I thought it would be something for the board and the school community to kind of hear an update and where we are at this time. So Dr. Matthews, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Murillo, and good evening, board. Tonight, I'm excited to present the potential of artificial intelligence, or AI, to enhance learning and empower our students in the 21st century. AI is a rapidly evolving field, as you'll see in a later slide, and I believe it holds immense promise for personalizing education, supporting educators, and fostering a love of learning in our students. Tonight, you will hear how we plan to leverage AI responsibly and strategically within our district as I provide some background information on artificial intelligence and tools, our vision for the use of AI in education, and our implementation roadmap. So I wanted to start with just a little bit of background on what is AI, and I borrowed a couple of definitions from experts. Beginning here with the International Society for Technology in Education, they define AI as artificial intelligence being a branch of computer science aimed at creating machines that mimic human intelligence. Britannica says it is the ability of a digital computer or computer-controlled robot to perform tasks commonly associated with intelligent beings. What I really want you to take note of here is that AI is a tool or a resource meant to perform tasks as a human would based on data and patterns, but it is not human. AI tools cannot think, they compute based on data sets and patterns. So I think that's a really important distinction to make about AI as we consider the context and use. Whether you realize it or not, you are likely encountering and using AI in your everyday lives. Most of the AI you encounter daily are either predictive, which means it's based on data and trends in your own personal use and then predicts what you might like to use it for next, or it can be reactive based on a voice command or some kind of specific input. Some examples of this might be virtual assistants, when you ask Siri or Alexa or a Google Assistant for an answer or help with something. It might be a smart home device, which can learn your schedule and preferences for heating and cooling or for when you want your lights turned up or down. Those would be some of those reactive and or possibly predictive based on your patterns of behavior. I'm sure many of you use facial recognition to be able to unlock a phone or maybe to use some preset settings in your car to adjust your seat or other uses like that. I know in social media, you might see content recommendations and ad targeting based on things you've been searching. I could keep going. Thank you. I'm okay. Back to that predictive use for the ad targeting and content. It might suggest friends or people you want to follow based on your search history. We also have entertainment and streaming. I don't know how often you might see a prompt. You watched this, you may want to watch this next based on your use. And finally, email filtering. I feel very fortunate that we have this tool to kind of filter out some of the noise in my inbox sometimes and direct things to spam that I don't necessarily need to read. So all of those are great examples of that reactive and predictive. But when we look at a third type of AI, the one that will commonly be used in education, it is generative AI. And generative AI tools create new content or outputs, often creating something novel from learned patterns and the data and tools they are trained on. Common examples of generative AI are ChatGPT, Gemini, and an example you see here in front of you called DALL-E. This is DALL-E 2, and it is an image generator rather than a text generator. And I wanted to highlight this slide for you to show you what I referenced earlier about the rapidly changing and evolving nature of AI. A prompt was put into DALL-E 2, which if you didn't have DALL-E 2, they are not even accepting new users anymore because they've updated their versions. But the prompt said to create an expressive oil painting of a chocolate chip cookie being dipped in a glass of milk depicted as an explosion of flavors. And the output is there on the right. The same exact prompt was put into DALL-E 3, the updated newer version. And the output was drastically different. Side by side, I think this really highlights how rapidly these changes are occurring. And this is a very visual example, but those same kinds of improvements and enhancements are happening in the generative field for text as well. So now that you have a little bit of background, and clearly you can see from the previous examples, AI is here and it's not going anywhere. AI today is what computers and the internet were 30 years ago. So our vision is to leverage AI technologies to create a future-ready learning that empowers students, teachers, and administrators. The primary goals of AI integration in education are personalized learning, utilizing AI-powered adaptive learning platforms to tailor educational content and instructional methods to individual student needs, learning styles, and pace. We also have a vision for enhanced efficiency. AI-assisted tools can support teachers in lesson planning, grading, and data analysis, allowing them to focus more on student engagement and personalized instruction. Also, implementing AI-driven solutions for tasks such as scheduling, data management, and/or other administrative processes can really be streamlined to save a lot of time. Again, reminder that this is a tool and a computer. It does not replace the human requirement to think critically about the AI-generated content. The teacher or the administrator is still essential in that process. And then finally, for future-ready skills, ultimately we want to equip students with essential AI literacy and skills to thrive in an increasingly AI-driven world. They are encountering a world that is AI-driven already, and they need to be able to critically think, problem solve, and use AI ethically and safely. One resource that we used with our AI work group is Teach AI, and it is a platform committed to providing thoughtful leadership to guide educational leaders in transforming education through teaching with AI and teaching about AI. This is one resource they provided, highlighting potential benefits of AI in education, which include the ability to develop content and differentiate instruction, design assessments and provide timely and effective feedback, tutoring and personalized learning assistance, and also aiding in creativity, collaboration, and skill development. And finally, operationalizing those efficiencies I discussed earlier. There are a lot of potential benefits, but with that, we know that we also need to be mindful of potential risks of AI in education, so we can be prepared to mitigate the risks and teach students to use AI responsibly. One initial worry some educators have is that students will use AI to commit plagiarism or academic dishonesty. There are also fears of diminished student and teacher agency and accountability if AI technologies are seen as deprioritizing the role of human educators in making educational decisions. Depending on how AI is used, there are concerns about student privacy and information sharing with AI sources, and some fear humans will become too dependent on these tools and resources and lose that ability to think critically for themselves. Finally, because generative AI creates content based on data sets and patterns it is trained on, there is a risk of perpetuating biases when using AI too. So another opportunity to think critically about those outputs and why are you getting certain outputs and do biases exist within those. There are several ways to mitigate risk when it comes to AI integration. First, AI tools should be very carefully selected. We would select tools that provide transparency in how they create their output to identify and address bias. We also need to educate users on the potential for bias in AI systems so they can select and use these tools more thoughtfully. This was a focus of our AI work group meeting last month. All AI-generated content and suggestions should be reviewed and critically reflected upon by students and staff. Again, remembering that AI tools are not thinking, they are computing based on those data sets and patterns. That human element to thoughtfully consider the content that was generated is still critical, especially when you think about student feedback, grading, any kind of learning support. Any instructional content needs to be vetted by a teacher to verify the accuracy of that information. And finally, policies and guidelines will need to be developed and adhered to protect the users of the AI tools. We will be using model policy from IASB as we consider a draft policy for approval from you all in the near future, and also considering user privacy, security, and ethical considerations. Those will all be essential components within the policy. So that gets to our really exciting part, our implementation roadmap starting on the left. Back in April, I and two of our other district leaders had the opportunity to attend a local workshop on AI in education in Des Moines, and it was led by the CEO of AI for Education, Amanda Bickerstaff, and she provided great information on how to really use and implement AI safely within education, and they also had a lot of suggestions and models for policy and guidelines to consider, and also how you get to that point of policy development and guidelines within a district for safe use. So that really launched us into thinking about, we need to have a work group. We need to get other input around how to really implement this. We need teachers who will be using it in their classrooms to really be a part of this process because they're the ones closest to the work. So in May, we were able to form a generative AI exploration work group. And it is composed of a representative group of teachers spanning all the way from kindergarten through 12th grade, as well as school and district leaders and members of our technology team who expressed interest in participating. And I just would like to publicly thank them, if I could, for a moment. They gave up an entire day of their summer and spent it with me in June, learning about AI and the potential benefits and uses, prompt engineering, biases and hallucinations within AI, and really dedicated some time and are really excited about pioneering this initiative for us. So that's my shout out to our AI exploratory work group. They've been wonderful to work with. So as I just mentioned, then in June, on the bottom in orange there, we did hold that first AI work group session, and we were able to engage in some professional learning, and they did start looking at IASB model policy and giving some input and feedback around what that might look like, what they might like me to propose to the policy review committee, to propose to you all, and then looking at that to really develop some user-friendly guidelines. So they gave a lot of great input and suggestions on what would be user-friendly for students, for parents to understand, for them as teachers to understand how AI will be used in schools. They gave us all of that feedback, and then we spent some time in July taking that back and drafting some potential guidelines that we might want to consider. And then that takes us to next week already in the more purple box at the bottom. We're bringing that work group back for another half day, so thank you to them for coming in again. And they're going to join our school leaders, and we are going to engage in some more professional learning on pedagogy with AI and then also student literacy with AI. And so we're very excited to be bringing AI for education in for some professional learning that day, and then also for administrators to know and understand where the work group is in the process. And then for the 2024-25 school year, this work group is really going to pilot and implement some carefully selected tools and resources that they might use to enhance their teaching and to create some of those efficiencies that we discussed. We will meet, they will give us feedback on how things are going, what tools are working well, any barriers or roadblocks they're encountering. They will also receive coaching and support on how to use these tools within their classrooms or in their planning to make sure that they're still aligned with our district curriculum, with the standards, that they're not deviating from what the expectations of the district are, that these are really to enhance and supplement. And then finally, after all of that work and input from them over the course of the school year, next summer we will launch district-wide at Summer Academy and have a professional learning session for all of our teachers and administrators. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
I have a couple questions. Well, I think mostly one primary one. So I'm a little bit stuck with this because I know typically our process, we form a work group and we put together policies and guidelines, exactly what you presented. And then normally, typically after that's implemented, the work group, is done. But because this technology keeps changing so rapidly and so drastically, has there been talk of possibly keeping this work group around, in future years? Has that been something that's been discussed?
Yes, that is a great question. And we were upfront with the work group about that and about the ever-changing nature of this. And even on the proposed guidelines, we felt it was important to note that these are draft at the current moment and subject to change based on the advancements in the technology.
Mm-hmm. And I think I got this from the presentation, just to kind of make sure. So there has been some talk a little bit about possibly integrating these technologies with services that store student data, but that's still just talk. There hasn't been any implementation steps at all yet.
Right. We would protect student data and privacy, and we've been working very closely with our chief technology officer to ensure that that is of the utmost importance, that we would not be sharing private student information or data.
I've heard a lot about of other people being very skeptical and very kind of worried about AI. Has there been a lot of enthusiasm from teachers and staff so far, or has it been a bit of mixed bag?
The work group is very enthusiastic and excited, I would say, overall. I think that there is some hesitation and fear still about, the cheating aspect and how do we monitor the use of it, and if they get inaccurate outputs, will they know, and those types of things. But overall, the feeling is excitement from the work group.
Those are all my questions.
Absolutely. And teachers are too, and that's why it's important that we have guidelines established, because they're using it.
Any other questions for Dr. Matthews? Thank you.
Thank you.
And for our final presentation, Ms. Ostrowski is going to join me at the podium on our 2025 legislative priorities. What's always amazing to me is how early the date keeps getting moved up, that everybody's seeking what are our priorities for this year. So, Ms. Ostrowski, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Murillo. Good evening. We are going to be just taking a quick look back at our priorities that the board prior to this board set for the 2024 session, and then talk a little bit about what priorities, and we're looking for 4, that we will be presenting back then for the next session that begins in January. We ask for your input and decision on these priorities at this time, as Dr. Murillo said, this early in the year, or mid-year, I should say, because our advocacy partners at the Iowa Association of School Boards and the Urban Education Network of Iowa, they do like to receive that input from the boards across the state, so that then their legislative teams can get together and develop their policies for their organizations to then take forward to advocate at the state level. Our 2024 policies, as approved by the board, were the following: timely, equitable, and adequate school funding. And Mrs. Greiner, if you would want to pass out as a reminder, and I was able to share some of this with you. You've probably already taken a look as a reminder. That details these 4 legislative priorities and kind of some of the language around what these topics mean. So the timely, equitable, and adequate school funding with flexibility, that's a lot wrapped into one. Then second priority was around mental health services and student safety. Number 3 was full-day preschool funding. And number 4 was to reestablish the open enrollment deadline. Okay. There was discussion on all of these topics throughout the legislative session, but I will say that number 4 was a successful effort, and the open enrollment deadline was reestablished for March of each year, and that has already been put into place. So I'm not going to be recommending that one for next year. So you'll see we have these 3 that we're proposing continuation of for your discussion, and then most certainly would like to entertain a 4th priority that we could then complete our allotment of 4 priorities to submit to the Iowa Association of School Boards. And I believe that Dr. Murillo and I would like to suggest one, but Mr. Tripp, I'll bring the floor back to you for discussion on these topics.
Thank you, Mrs. Strowski, for putting me on the spot there. Well, Board, as you can see, every year we do this. We have a set of priorities that we like to bring. I believe Ms. Myers takes lead on that at the convention and goes and presents what we have determined as our priorities and to ISB. We see that the 3 up there are still, I think they're still adequate, they're still accurate, and they're still needed. The 4th one, we did get one moved. We got one through, so that was a win. So as Ms. Ostrowski said, we are in need of a new priority that we would like to focus on. Does anybody on the board have any thoughts on that before I let Dr. Murillo provide us with some of her thoughts?
Well, I'm just going to speak up in favor of our proposal to advocate for full-day preschool. I'm wearing my crayon today. Thank you, Ms. Myers, to remind us that we do have a child care crisis. Our parents in our community rely upon us to act as that child care provider during the day, during the school year. And when we have only partial day, as in most school districts in the state of Iowa, there's only a partial day funding available for those students. And which really makes it difficult for families to have a reliable means of having that child taken care of during the rest of the day. We have an incredible facility that at our Ann Nelson Early Childhood Learning Center that has hosted families throughout this year that is a beacon to the rest of the state, saying that full-day preschool is possible. And it is budgetable. I mean, yes, when we looked at our report, we saw that we had $5,000 deficit in a program that took care of 155 students, roughly, throughout the year. So that's an amazing feat that happened. That happened, but it didn't happen without community support. But we need the state to step in and make universal early childhood education unescapable. I mean, if the governor wants more adults to be in the workforce, then we need to have their children taken care of in a high-quality preschool setting, whether it's a newborn, whether it's a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old. We took care of all of those students in our Early Childhood Learning Center this year. And in 2004, when 2 board members from Council Bluffs stood on the floor of the Delegates Assembly and pushed through early childhood education funding that wasn't in the priorities. Two of our members, Marvin Armpriester and at that time, and Gina Malloy, pushed through a priority that wasn't even in the booklet. And you know, if it's not in the booklet, it requires additional it requires an additional vote, so that the majority of the delegates have to approve it to change the rules on the floor. So Council Bluffs was responsible for getting early childhood education going in this state in 2004, 2005. And we need to continue leading the state in continuing the importance of full funding, full day, universal preschool for all Iowa students. So I can't say enough about the leaders before us that took a chance and said, we got to do this. And we just need to continue to carry that ball and get it across get it across the goal line, so that we can make sure that all students in the state have access to a high-quality preschool program that is public, that is a public, full-funded program.
There was some action on this last year, but it didn't come to fruition, and that was Senate File 2383 that escalated over 2 years to the full funding. And that was for full-day pre-K whose families were below the 185% of federal poverty. So there was some action. There's already language out there. So perhaps the introduction of similar or the same language could be carried forward.
Hey, we're already, if not this year, next year, we're already going to be paying full vouchers for millionaires and billionaires to send their kids in Iowa to private schools.
That's what I was-
I don't see why we can't advocate for our students that are well below the poverty level to demand full day, full funding for preschool. I mean, the governor's already earmarked that, millionaires can take public dollars and use those public dollars to put their kid through a private school.
Yeah, I was wondering if it's too late to make a priority that public funding sticks with public schools.
That's a major overthrow of
Yep, okay.
of the leadership.
Well, this whole process for me, I find odd, because I don't know if any of you guys feel this way, but to me, the past few years, it seems like each year it's not as much a focus on what our priorities are, but it's more of a what's going to come out of the legislative assembly this time that we need to panic about. If it's public schools for public dollar or public funds for public schools, or if it's what happened last year with the AEAs, and so the whole process, I think, of asking this early, I almost feel like we should be asking later for these priorities that better match with what's actually going to happen. I did have a quick question on open enrollment. Now, in the past, that open enrollment deadline before it was done away, that was October, I think, wasn't it?
No,
It was always March? Okay, that's, for some reason I was thinking it was October, and I thought it was odd, the date change, but never mind that, I withdraw my question.
So a little bit about the why I think we go early is the governor usually sets our priorities in September and October before she begins to roll out for the state speech, right? State of the state. So this way, we kind of are coming together and crafting our priorities, hoping to share some to see if any would be something she would pick up. I did share with Mr. Tripp and Mr. Kozire that I did have a small group of lobbyists contact me and ask if I would advocate with them for the preschool funding. So tomorrow I'm meeting with Mark and Melissa and Tracy to kind of look through. I have spoke with the governor's office already. I am trying to figure out exactly how I would put my game plan together to advocate for that. This has been, and what I shared with the governor's office is, this has been a priority for us for many years. So this is not something that just this year. It's now us figuring out how do we deliver the message that shows equity and also provides that high quality and get it away from adults and center on what's good for children. Because we know that it is a priority for the governor to see us move back to being number one in education, top state, right? And we also know that they're really focused on early literacy, the science of reading. And so we know that we have some components here, but also the key thing is what you spoke of, Mr. Kozire, is we have many districts that only do a half day. We have many districts like us that do full day, except for we have a couple of classrooms that are still half day. But for the most part, we got at least 30 classrooms that are full day. And if we didn't have the partnerships and applying for the grants that Dr. Matthews and Ms. Sanders and all of them do, we would not be able to offer these services. Even us extending birth to 2 more classrooms next year because the need is so great. So we also know that the workforce and getting them back to work, which is also a priority of the governor, is something that we can help with. It's just now, how do we help with the shift and how do we do this strategically so that it is something that everyone feels it is I guess, a good return on the investment and there's value add. Because we do have a lot of legislators that believe parents should be responsible for their own childcare. And we're seeing it as a way, because I often talk with my cabinet members that K through 6, we're not only educating children, but we provide childcare for parents. Kindergarten, first, second, third, you would not leave any of these children at home by themselves. So we're providing, and as I've told you before, I went back and did research. When did we start paying for full day? It was never passed by the legislators that I can find, and I pushed that out to lobbyists to prove me wrong. It was something that was, the Department of Ed said, if you want to offer it, go ahead, you don't have to. And then year 2, they started funding it. So I don't know, there's no way to draw any parallel tracks. You did it this way, so let's do it this way for preschool. We're in the uncharted waters of how do we help everyone see the value and what this does for our students. And we have 5 years of data, which Dr. Matthews is helping me pull together, that we're going to share with them, that we can follow the cohorts. The only thing, there's one cohort we can't follow, but for most part, we have those cohorts. And so we'll be able to show how we did, as you've seen each year as she presents, where our kids started, where they ended in comparison to the state. But remember, we're full day. Most of those districts will probably be a half day. So it's not going to be an apples to apples comparison, but I do think that we could encourage, and we have certified teachers, and many other districts do not keep a certified teacher all day. So you see how many different variations there are out there, and how do we come together and figure out how to solve this? I'm already digging deeper than I really want to know, but if I'm going to take a position, I've got to have some good, strong background in it.
Are these priorities, are they weighted, like number 1 is most important, followed by number 2, or is it just 1, 2, 3, 4 priorities? Okay.
I don't know if we want to continue with our priorities based around funding, but I know we've had conversations in the past about our special ed funding.
I think that gets into timely, I mean, at a time, and we had 7 or 8 priorities, but through the process, that really, I believe we kind of funneled that down in the past through that timely and equitable and adequate school funding, because special education funding is part of the total funding. It's like, we just need to make sure it's adequate, and we know that it hasn't been. I mean, when we have $2.5 million deficit in special education funding, is it adequate? No, not in our particular case, because we serve 17 to 18% of our student population have an individual education plan, which is part of that special education funding. So for us as a district, it's critical.
The whole timely, equitable, and adequate, that's pretty much a request every year, a blanket request. Do we need to be more focused I like
And
how
that's what
last-
I was
I like
getting
how-
at. Yeah,
how
if it
last
needs to
year-
be specific
last year
or
we were more specific
overview.
on
Mhm.
funding flexibility. Would that be more important to have flexibility for our spending, because we know they're only going to give us 3%, no matter if we demand 20. So that's almost, in my opinion, kind of a waste of an ask, because it's just not going to happen. So flexing or having that flexibility might be a stronger way to ask for, hey, we have extra money over here, can we use it for this? That might be the more priority thing for us to do.
Was the timely, because I'm trying to remember, I know I was in the meeting last year, but wasn't on the board, but was the timely tied to open enrollment? Was that?
No, it was just the budget being approved.
How
From
much
the
are they
state.
gonna give us?
so
It's pretty late.
That didn't,
Late.
gotcha,
We never
gotcha.
approved the budget
Yeah.
before we had to submit our yearly budget.
Gotcha,
We
okay,
did not approve the funding for it.
gotcha.
If we were to focus on flexibility, it could be adequate school funding with appropriate flexibility or something like that, if we really wanted to fine tune that versus the equitable and timely. Adequate would get to the weighting that we need and could benefit districts of poverty in meeting the needs of children through the extra weighting, for example.
I just think that having a very focused position will give us a better chance of getting it through instead of doing all of it. Just give us pieces at a time, and each year we'll get another piece of the puzzle until we have
So if we, based on what you were saying, if we just, and what Mrs. Strosky was saying, if we would just ask for adequate and flexible school funding.
Yeah. There was one flexibility we were looking for in the management around school safety or safety and all that. That didn't go through. The DE did move and make one pivot for us, that we were able to use a little bit of the dollars out of the management, but we were thinking we could almost move over 2 billion, and that didn't happen. So it stayed in the operating.
I've made a note of that. And then I think I heard clearly full-day preschool funding is staying in here. Okay. A fourth one that you might consider, and it's one that was, there were 3 bills that were in motion last year, and that was related to the school start date. You recall that August 23rd is set by the state as the first day that you can start school in Iowa. And as we know this year, it will be Friday, August 23rd. And it provides a little less flexibility for us to set a calendar that fits well for our community. And this year we'll be going past Labor Day because of the inability to start a little bit earlier. And so some of those bills, again, had some legs, but they allowed it to start a little bit earlier, still after the state fair, but with districts then being able to choose when they could start even before the 23rd. Don't know if you'd want to consider something like that again.
I think that'd be good. Or even just having it towards not tied to the state fair. I always thought that was kind of silly personally.
Major overhaul of leadership.
This
Yeah.
will be beneficial for our entire community, because we'll be able to set our calendar, like Mrs. Strasky was saying,
Yeah.
so that it best fits. Like, we can start on maybe not a Monday, but a Tuesday or a Monday, a half day or something, and we can better onboard our kids to introducing them to the new year instead of today, Friday, really. We might as well not even have it on Friday, right? Everybody's just gonna skip over.
We'll get all of our supplies in and be
Yeah.
able to go through processes, routines. Next year it will be, if nothing changes, it will be the 25th will be the first day.
So every time
Pushes
it
back.
pushes further, that just extends us further
Further.
closer to June.
It'll be the 26th the following year.
To get our 190 days in with students, yeah.
Dr. Merla, did you have any suggestions?
No, I think we say full-day preschool funding, and we may even want to put like weighted year one, something of that way. Maybe adding that. Diane and I have tried to really think through, the calendar was one that popped up to us, and I think, I think it's just continuing to work. If we could get preschool, that would be the biggest one we could get. It would be the biggest. I mean, the funding's always going to be there, but like you say, like this year, because of the ADA and the process we went through, I know of districts that had to go back after they had negotiated a teacher contract because they didn't get the percent they were looking for, and they had to go back and negotiate because they couldn't award the raises they thought they were going to be able to do. And so it is really something to have that timely budget set. The flexibility would hit what we were talking about with the school safety and the cybersecurity and all of that.
Could you look at separating, when I look at the description between mental health and student safety, do we separate those two?
I like that. I would like that.
Because that would also give us a more punch, or more emphasis on the mental health services. And I know I'm still seeing a significant, I'm sure the schools are still, I see it in post-secondary. And it's not going away. It's not diminished. It has legs as well.
I think we could
Is
really
running.
combine that and put the safety part with what we do in two folds there, and getting some funding, additional funding. And I do know, we're still working through our grants that we received. Well, we haven't received them, but we're close. Where some ESSER dollars were allocated for school safety. And that's how we did some additional work in our schools. About 50,000 a building, is that correct, John? And so we're very close to having all the Ts crossed and the Is dotted. I think I saw the last email said we just had one more thing we had to do, and we will be done, and that's quite a bit of piece of change for 14 different schools. But yeah, that's a great suggestion. We could take a stab at that.
Yes, so if I heard you correctly, Dr. Rosello, we would separate out the mental health services priority from a student safety one, and then perhaps not have the school calendar one. Or we could forego the student safety one, since we do have some funding and have had some success in that in past years, and really then focus and hone in on the mental health services as a priority.
And there's nothing wrong with just having three. You don't have to have four.
Has there ever been discussion on funding for summer school?
I was really shocked Iowa does not do that. But it has, this year we did get a grant. Of course, they had extra dollars left from the special federal dollars that were sent to us. So we were able to apply. Carly did a great job for Dr. Matthews. And I think we received about $340,000, $377. That helped us offset our summer school tuition. You can't have summer school till we get preschool.
The wheels.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Keep that in our thought for next year.
Is this something we need to finalize tonight?
Well, the Iowa Association of School Boards requests these by August 15th, hence our meeting
Our
this
C's
evening.
meeting,
Mhm.
yeah.
We would have been a couple weeks after that at our next meeting, so, yeah.
Yep.
Do we have a specific need for additional student safety, or how do we sit with that? We had a big push the last few years with
Yeah.
all of our front ends having, double door locks and all the key cards and all our doors registering on phones and everything.
Can you take that more global? We think physical safety. We think, we have, but are we looking, internet safety? We have,
Is that
like,
part of mental health?
Not necessarily.
I don't-
About where we are.
Different, but you could do emotional.
Let John share a little bit about where we are, you
think-
see both sides of the coin for me. And I know you sent me even some things today about it, so.
So as far as overall plant security, all of our schools have a safety vestibule. All of our schools have electronic locks controlled. All of our schools have updated alert systems throughout them. Now, what they don't have is not all of our outside doors are key access or card access, which we believe is ultimately a great goal for us. Now, flipping over to the cybersecurity, it's an ever-evolving world. We had Dr. Matthews presenting on AI. It can help us, it can hurt us in this arena. It finds flaws faster than we've ever saw. And the reality of is we're seeing things that can be affected much faster than ever before.
So is there anything you would like to have that you don't have?
At-
More security, either on the cyber side or besides the
Absolutely.
card reader?
So additional card readers, additional cameras. So those, and then the other thing is more monitoring services for our cybersecurity side, because right now we're doing pen tests, we have some monitoring, but we don't have, like there's some DDoS things that I'd love to see. We do some of it, but not all of it. So it's just it's a cost.
Would you be able to pay for some of that if that bill had gone through with the management?
Absolutely.
There we
With
go.
a smile.
There we go.
Yeah.
That's what we fight for then, John. Thank you. Okay, so maybe then we just leave it with mental health services this year. Additional dollars and focus on that. Or do you want to keep mental health and student safety?
I think the calendar is very important.
You know, if we're going to have a fourth one, like,
Yeah.
let's put it on. I mean, it's something that's important to a lot of districts, like all of them in the state, so, you know, it's not that big of a deal, in my opinion, to say, okay, it needs to be the week of, but it can be anywhere within that week.
You know, I really had never experienced how powerful the visitors bureau lobbyists feel they are. They were the biggest opponent to that calendar change. It's going to cut down on Okoboji. That was one of the main ones that I saw in many meetings of people going there. You're going to take away, you're going to shorten our summer, we're going to lose revenue.
Takes away all the
And
staff.
then, yeah, and then the fair. I mean, that was the other people that were in there. So it will be a hard, but maybe because it comes to the 25, 26, you know, before it gets back to the 23rd, maybe we can get some flexibility at least for 2 years. If it ends on a weekend, we can start the week before in 2 days or something. I don't know. I mean, we'll have to just figure out how to craft it and work with Margaret.
Flexibility.
I don't know how we'll word it. We'll have to work on the wording.
Well, I have drafted 4 proposed priorities then to include in a motion. I'll read them if that's okay, and then what I could do is share even with Mrs. Greiner next to me if she would like to read it. But it would include adequate and flexible school funding, mental health services funding. I think funding is probably the key. Funding seems to be the trend because the next one is full-day preschool funding. And the outlier is the school calendar and school start date. I don't know if the word flexibility needs to be in there or what language specifically we should propose, but.
I'm just wondering, I don't know this question, or the answer. What would be most beneficial to students, the flexibility in funding or the flexibility in the start date?
Well, the funding will always be how we can offer as many opportunities and be able to take care of. The start date is just something that brings the condition of us having the opportunity to start at a reasonable time.
Right. Well, I mean, like the flexibility, like we were talking about the student safety that Mr. Stiles was talking about. If we could have flexible funding, like do we add flexible into number 1 or?
We did.
Oh, you did?
Mhm.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, adequate
I'm sorry.
and flexible.
Adequate,
Mhm.
okay,
You
sorry.
bet.
I'm sorry.
Those are still from last time. So
Okay.
what she was reading was what
Okay,
she's writing.
yeah, sorry.
And again, I'm okay with staying with 3, and we'll just hit the pavement on the start date and see how far we can get.
I'm okay with that too. Obviously, it had some legs last year, so it's probably going to be something that's going to be brought up again anyways. But it's up to
My
you guys.
question is, since we saw some activity with it last year, are we going to, I assume it's going to make a reappearance in our.
Diane, so with the bills that were introduced last year about the calendar, they just didn't move forward, so they're not entirely dead, but they can be reintroduced next session, is that correct? Or did they
Is
end
this
up?
the second part of the session? Does anybody know that?
It was
No, it'd
the
be-
Okay,
second
they would be,
ended
they would be
Ended
new
last year.
bills.
So they'd have to be
Mhm.
reintroduced, okay.
Yep.
So it's
They
not like
didn't
they're
make
going
it
to
to the
carry
final.
over?
And if you have
Because
a
if they made it
fourth,
to a committee.
Mhm. The other benefit of having these priorities is then when you all meet with our local legislators prior to the session, you have an opportunity to discuss our local perspective on each of those too. So I might propose that 4 could give us just a little bit more opportunity to talk about what's important, but 3 would hone in on our 3 highest. So that's the board's prerogative.
All right, so I suppose the resolution on the floor is if we wish to continue with the way that Ms. Ostrowski just read off, the way she's written with 4 priorities for the year. That's what's on the floor right now. If we
Well,
would-
yeah, we'll take care of that in resolutions right now, so that would be good to deal with that.
Thank you, Mr. Ostrowski. And that concludes our presentation, or our report.
Awesome, thank you. All right, and that brings us to our resolutions. First up on our resolution list is approval of the 2022-23 audit.
I move that the board accept the June 30th, 2023 audit report from Edie Bailey LLC as presented.
I will second. Teresa got it earlier.
I'll give it to Tracy. We have a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion regarding the audit from the board, aside from it being clean and looks like everybody's doing a fantastic job? Seeing as there is none, Ms. Ostrowski, please call the roll.
Mr. Kozire?
Yes.
Ms. Hardeman?
Yes.
Ms. Myers?
Yes.
Dr. Rosello?
Yes.
Mr. Peters?
Yes.
Mrs. Greiner?
Yes.
Mr. Tripp?
Yes, and the motion carries. Next up, we have approval of the 2025 legislative priorities. Again, this is well, we'll go ahead and let Ms. Reiner read them off for us.
I move that the board approves the 2025 legislative priorities as presented. Number 1, adequate and flexible school funding. Number 2, mental health services funding. Number 3, full-day preschool funding. And number 4, school calendar and school start date.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion regarding our legislative priorities for 2025? There's none. Ms. Ostrowski, please call the roll.
Mrs. Greiner?
Yes.
Dr. Rosello?
Yes.
Ms. Hardeman?
Yes.
Ms. Myers?
Yes.
Mr. Peters?
Yes.
Mr. Kozire?
Yes.
Mr. Tripp?
Yes, and the motion carries. Next up, we have approval of the administrative regulations.
I move that the board approves the administrative regulations as presented. 101.1, belief statements and student learning strategic goals. 305.1, administrator code of ethics. 401.4, workplace safety. 415.1, licensed personnel hiring. 415.2, licensed personnel probation and employment contract. 415.4, practicum students. 415.6, Employee Code of Rights and Responsibilities Regulation. 424.2, Certification of Healthcare Provider for Employees' Serious Health Condition under the Family and Medical Leave Act. 424.3, Notice of Eligibility and Rights and Responsibilities under the Family and Medical Leave Act. 513.2, Anti-Bullying Harassment Complaint Form. 513.3, Disposition of Anti-Bullying Harassment Complaint Form. 526.1, Affidavit for Special Minors Restricted License. 701.8, Local, State, Federal Miscellaneous Revenue. 701.9, Debt Management. 701.10, Transfer of Funds. And 713.3, Expenditures for a Public Purpose, and 906.1, Use or Rental of School Facilities Regulation.
Thank you, Ms. Greiner. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion regarding the list of administrative regulations?
I just noticed some spacing issues on page 37. Yes, there was one more too. But I note, it was that page. That was the only page I noticed it when I was reading through, so.
Already corrected, thank you so much. Apologize for that.
I think we were emailed earlier, I think it was last week, about the belief statements being removed. I'm trying to remember from the last meeting, was that was a new addition to remove that, or was that, or am I?
The belief statements have just kind of been there since 2015,
Yeah.
and they're not really relevant to where we are and what we have.
Mhm.
So we felt like, and the committee felt like the best is just to remove them.
Okay.
Just to strike them.
Anything further from the board? All right, seeing as there is no further comment, Mrs. Strasky, please call our roll.
Mrs. Greiner.
Yes.
Mr. Peters.
Yes.
Mr. Kozire.
Yes.
Dr. Rosello.
Yes.
Ms. Myers.
Yes.
Ms. Hardeman.
Yes.
Mr. Tripp.
Yes, and the motion carries. Next up, we have the naming of former Crescent Elementary building. Is there a motion?
I move to rename the former Crescent School Building to Council Bluffs Community School District Extracurricular Training Facility as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I can second.
And discussion.
After some discussion, it's come to our attention that we're not necessarily set on moving forward with renaming the facility at this time. So I would like to move that we table the naming of the building until we can come to a conclusion from the board on how we want to move forward.
All right, we have a motion to table this resolution. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, any further discussion regarding?
It's non-debatable.
Non-debatable.
Right.
Doesn't matter. Okay. Does that roll call?
Yeah.
Mrs. Strasky, please call the roll.
Mr. Kozire.
Yes.
Ms. Hardeman.
Yes.
Ms. Myers.
Yes.
Dr. Rosello.
Yes.
Mr. Peters.
Yes.
Mrs. Greiner.
Yes.
Mr. Tripp.
Yes, and that resolution is tabled. Next up, we have Securely Learning Portal with implementation. Is there a motion?
I move the board approve Securely Learning Portal with implementation for $104,900 paid over 4 installments through June 30th of 2028.
Thank you.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion regarding this resolution? All right, Mrs. Strasky, please call the roll.
Dr. Rosello.
Yes.
Mrs. Greiner.
Yes.
Mr. Peters.
Yes.
Mr. Kozire.
Yes.
Ms. Myers.
Yes.
Ms. Hardeman.
Yes.
Mr. Tripp.
Yes, and the motion carries. Lastly, on our resolutions, we have an increase for substitute teacher rates for the 2024-2025 school year. Is there a motion?
I move that the board approves the increased substitute rates for the 2024-2025 school year.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion regarding the increase in rates?
I appreciate the raise in rates, and I think it'll keep our district really competitive, and yeah, it's really good. Thank you.
Just for public knowledge, if you haven't read through, the daily rate is increasing from 170 to 175. Long-term rate for those here between 11 and 40 days going from 190 to 195, and long-term substitutes, which is over 40 days, is going up to 205. Also with this is a proposed increase for paraprofessionals, minimum rate starting at $12.50 and moving to $14. So, any further discussion? Excellent. Mrs. Strasky, please call the roll.
Ms. Hardeman.
Yes.
Mr. Peters.
Yes.
Mrs. Greiner.
Yes.
Mr. Kozire.
Yes.
Ms. Myers.
Yes.
And Mr. Tripp? Or did I forget? Dr. Rosello, thank you.
Yes.
Darn it, the last one. Dr. Rosello and Mr. Peters.
Mr. Tripp.
Mr. Tripp.
It's okay. It's been a long night. Yes, and the motion carries. All right, lastly, we have our consent agenda. On our consent agenda tonight is approval for consulting agreement with Gehring Consulting LLC, special education contracts with LearnWell, nursing services through University of Pediatrics, Boys Town Metro Intervention Center, and Southwest Iowa Transit. Also approval of a special education contract for students placed outside of Council Bluffs Community School Districts, being in AmeriServe International and Boys Town Day School. Also our personnel action, and lastly, claims and accounts. Is there a motion?
I move that we approve our consent agenda.
I will second.
Thank you. Motion and a second. Any discussion regarding our consent agenda? Mrs. Strowski, please call our roll.
Mr. Cozier?
Yes.
Dr. Rosello?
Yes.
Ms. Myers?
Yes.
Ms. Hardeman?
Yes.
Mrs. Greiner?
Yes.
Mr. Peters?
Yes.
Mr. Tripp?
Yes, the motion carries, and that concludes our meeting. Excellent work, everybody. Thank you.